lot of them is we're not afraid of it. Tammy didn't include it in the intro, but I was a nerd like when I was a little kid. I would get up on Saturday mornings and go to math and science club to dissect things and learn about blood types and just whatever weird thing my science teacher thought we should do. And then I go home and play with all my friends and pretend like I hadn't for 3 hours. Which is why I realize it's really important for us to destigmatize Black intellectualism. What that really means is, to embrace Black genius, and not just the academic or scholarly genius, but genius in general. Because, we've been socialized to believe that, being smart is not cool. And that gets in the way for a lot of things. I don't want to sit down yet. So, first of all, technical difficulties. I had lovely pictures for you, which you will not see, but I'll make the presentation available online at my website, which is www.firyali.com, just if you're interested. I really wanted to talk to you about what Afrofuturism is and why it's important to us. First of all, how many of you have seen Black Panther? Let's get that. Okay. How many of you are planning to see it? Because I don't want to give any spoilers. I've seen it 3 times, and every time I see something else that I didn't see before. They built a whole world. They did a really good job of creating an experience. And I caution you, when you look at it with a critical eye, to remember that it's not really fair to our artists and creators for us to expect their products to be all things to all people. Quite often we have this high bar of what we expect when one of us has a business or creates a product, and then we have this other bar that everything is okay because it just is. I think it's great. So Afrofuturism is a term that actually was coined in the 20th century, and it is a reflection of, they were specifically pointing to speculative fiction and science fiction writers. Professor T. Ford did an excellent job of kind of going through the bibliography and showing you some of the books and telling you about some of the authors. I will say that Tananarive Due and her husband Stephen Barnes are not only writers, they're screenwriters, and they're educators. I spent about 30 minutes recording an interview with them yesterday, where the emphasis, I had to actually ask them about their writing, because even though they're my favorite authors, yes, I confess they're my favorite living authors, they didn't talk about any of their books. Even when they made references to literature, they were talking about Nnedi Okorafor or Octavia Butler or someone else. They didn't take it wasn't about them. They wanted to talk about how important it is for us to learn to look at the universe through different eyes. So Afrofuturism is really about being able to imagine a future that includes us, and ideally, it's a future that includes a happy us. And typically, that framework is sci-fi, comic books, graphic art. Keith, Andy, you want to add anything to that? I just don't want to diss the genre, because there's a classic definition in terms of speculative fiction, science fiction, graphic novels, comic books, and some art.
My understanding of it is it's basically science fiction told from an Afrocentric Black African point of view. And generally the images that are associated with it are obviously Black people. But if you were to basically take something like Star Wars and replace the cast with Black actors and base some of the mythology in African culture, you get Afrofuturism.
And theoretically, at minimum, it includes our culture. So it's not how many of you have seen the Black Barbie doll?
They couldn't hear his
response.
So
what he said is, he talked about science fiction and all of these things, specifically about Black people, with us kind of centered and with our culture centered. For example, think of Star Trek with an all-Black cast and with African-centered values. I think the values and even the making sure it really is authentic in terms of us is important. And I bring up the Barbie dolls because when I was little, like they had like, they had a black Barbie, but it was just the white Barbie with brown plastic. And so the hair didn't look like anybody I know, the facial features didn't look like anybody I know. And
Right.
so
That would be more African that would be more image conscious African representation versus what, at least I don't really consider that futurism. I just consider that representation in different genres, but specifically to Afrofuturism. Now this is my point of view. This is not in the Bible, but I'm just saying.
yeah.
I think a lot of it's also based on Egyptian history as far as Egyptian.
Some of it. So
A lot of
right.
the imagery.
So one of the things that we as people of African descent have to remember is that Africa is a big continent. It's a huge continent with a whole bunch of countries on it, and we tend to focus on Egypt because I think probably because of like King Tut and the gold and everything
And
we were
the
interested
advances in
in.
science and math and all that.
So because there were people and civilizations before them, and there were scientific advances. For example, the Dogon people, they were great astronomers, and they were able to track the paths of and recognize binary star systems before there were telescopes strong enough to see those things. So people thought they were crazy when they were saying, there's two stars. And they're like, no, you can only see one. And then one day someone made a telescope that was strong enough and realized that, in fact, it was more than one. So anyway, the classic frame is really about entertainment and art. And from an African-centered point of view, art is not just art for its own sake. There's a purpose. So it's great to imagine worlds. And so the reason that I proposed a challenge of Afrofuturism is that my challenge is that we stretch that frame and that we don't just imagine these things, that we actually then go from imagining them and utilize our genius to reverse engineer that process and move forward and make those things happen.
Bring it into the fruition, bring it into reality, not just conceptualize it and draw pretty pictures about it, but actually implement some of these
Right.
ideas in the real world.
And so I can't see all of you because the lights are like right, they're right in my eyes. And I know that there's people on the stairs too. So if you're like raising your hand or you want to say something and I don't acknowledge you, it's because I can't see you. Like I can see blurs. But so originally I was just going to talk about community building and tightening up our organizations and looking at education because there are images of it goes across all sectors. Like there's 8 dimensions of wellness. You've got your financial, you've got your physical and mental health and well-being, you've got your finances, you've got your social life, you've got all these different spheres of your life. And for me, I say stretch that frame of Afrofuturism to come up with visions of how we want our lives to be in those different spheres, and then break it down because we have people in our community with expertise in all of those areas who can help us to come up with plans and strategies to move in that direction.
I have a question for you,
Uh-huh.
because relating to what's on your shirt.
Okay.
What type of resistance have you gotten when it comes to you speaking on conspiracy as it pertains to science? Like, what are people not believing the words?
Well, some people are afraid of science. I mean, there are people. I mean, and there's different types of science phobia. Some people are afraid because for a lot of science, there's a lot of math, right? And we often have people afraid they have math phobia. So you've got that kind of fear, and then you've got people who righteously, based on history, believe that a lot of the experiments that are being done are not necessarily being done in our best interest. And then when new science is released or when information about something that has happened, whether it's medical or chemical or whatever, there's a certain skepticism because there's an absence of trust. But at the same time, I can't say that that trust, there's been a strong effort to build that trust. So, it goes a bunch of ways. But I wear this because I believe that while science will not solve all of our problems, a lot of them can be addressed through science. If nothing else, through the scientific method of observing, measuring, and analyzing, and then coming to an understanding or a conclusion. Quite often, we...
Would you say there's a financial barrier too? Because science, that stuff costs.
It could be a financial barrier. Some of it costs money, but not all of it. Thinking is free.
That's true.
It doesn't cost anything to take a moment and think. Because a lot of times...
I mean, for instance, you have Elon Musk who just launched a rocket, a car on top of it, out in orbit, but that wasn't government funded, as far as I know. That was out of his pocket or his funders.
It was a private venture.
Venture,
so here's the thing, and money is important, and capitalism is the method by which things happen right now. But there's a lot of money being spent in our community on things that aren't necessarily contributing to our well-being. So, beyond science, so I started off saying I had all this stuff I wanted to talk about, and then something happened to make me realize that there was something that was more important than this whole broad, general, let's build better communities and da-da-da-da-da. Education is important. Over-policing is important. All of these things are areas where we have it within us. Anything that's within our sphere of control, we could choose to exercise that control. But the thing that I realized is the most important, and maybe I'm biased because I've had to learn this lesson recently, is taking care of our health. If we don't prioritize our mental and physical well-being, it doesn't matter how much money we have, it doesn't matter how many friends we have, none of those things matter. It doesn't matter how many degrees I have, doesn't mean anything if I'm not healthy enough to actually do something with it. So my biggest hope for our community and challenge at the same time is that we'll prioritize not just our future, but our health and well-being. And there's going to be workshops specifically addressing those things, but I feel like I would be doing a disservice if I tried to say that all of these things are equal and we just need to spread out and do all of them. Let's be healthy. Let's have healthy families and healthy children. And even, it doesn't matter how healthy our children are if we're not healthy enough to take care of them and be a part of their life in a meaningful way. Yes. You know what? Yeah.
And speaking of the sciences, which ones, or is it all of them that affect us, or Afrofuturism, or are designed to think for the future? Which one specifically, or is there one?
I don't think there is one specifically. I don't even think there's one specific path or discipline towards being healthy. I think that there's Christian Rudy says there are many paths to any given destination. There are a lot of different ways. Just in the same way there are a lot of diets and plans to lose weight. And it's not about which plan is better, it's about which one can you stick with and do. And when it comes to science, some of the best discoveries came by accident. Penicillin was not an intentional discovery. Well, it's not our friend these days, but it's an example of scientific discovery that happened by accident. And some of it is just repetition. Along those lines, we have a lot of focus right now on STEM. And all of those things are really important. Science, technology, engineering, math. But if we're looking at our future, if we leave out arts and humanities, what kind of future is that? So really, for me, the real question is knowing that, you know, Afrofuturism for me is a lens. It's a framework within which to function. So, you know, I've been reading comic books since I was a little kid, and I enjoy them. And I go to all the superhero movies, and I do my thing. But on a broader scale, I think knowledge just for its own sake is vanity. In the same way that we study history, and I think it's important to think about Afrofuturism during Black History Month because of its strong connection to history. And when we study history and we stop there, like we just like learn some dates, that's vanity, in my opinion. I think it's just navel gazing. It's like, yay, I memorized, you know, everybody's like what day they were born and what day they did stuff. It's good to know those things, but if you don't do anything with that knowledge, then, I mean, yeah, I guess it was a good hobby.
There is a value into just, not to contradict what you just said, but there's a value in you get self-confidence, I guess, out of knowing about that history.
So
Even though you're talking about taking it a step further, you're talking about actually implementing the knowledge, but it's not completely wasted. I mean, what's the old saying? If you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going.
You don't know where you're going. So
Right.
if you're going to apply it to where you're going, you're applying it. So that saying in and of itself is still based on using what you learn about the past and experience.
Yeah, but to me, it's a catch-22 because if you don't have that history in you, that's where our insecurities come from. So therefore, if you're insecure, you can't move forward. Even if you can have all the book smarts in the world, if you're not confident in yourself to get out the door and actually open your mouth and start.
You hear what you just said?
What?
You said you can't move forward.
Right, if you don't
Okay.
if you don't have some type of foundation.
Right, so moving forward is kind of the key, it's the heart of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you have to go out and re-engineer anything as an individual, but part of moving forward, and I hear what you're saying. You're saying history, study it, to gain confidence and feel great about yourself and feel empowered.
Right.
And there's value in self-confidence, but self-confidence without any kind of action to support it is only going to get you so far.
No, I agree. I'm just saying they probably won't go anywhere without confidence to even get to where you're trying to get us to.
Well, I'm hoping I'm not the only one that wants to get us there. I mean, you know, I'm not asking people to do anything that's, you know, extraordinarily revolutionary. I'm not saying, you know, go out and burn anything down or go out as an individual and create this, you know, utopian society. But if we can't even, so, you know, it's hard with content creators like you to help us imagine and to stimulate those imaginations. But really, if we only imagine it, then we're, you know, it's just another drug. You know, fantasy is great and entertaining, but, you know, take it a step further and figure out how you can make your dreams come true.
Guess I'm afraid I missed a small part of the beginning. I was actually doing business in the backside over there of your presentation. But in light of the conversation you're having now, and the very timeliness of this conversation vis-a-vis the Black Panther movie coming out, part of the challenge I think we face, and I'd like you to have some conversation about, is that with very rare exception, the vast majority of us in this room and in this country see things through a Eurocentric lens, because that's all we've been given, almost all we've been given. Now, most of the folks in this event are going to be somewhat more enlightened because we're at this event, and you can see by the dress and by the conversation, we may be doing more from an Afrocentric perspective than the average, quote-unquote, average African-American. But we have this idea of Wakanda being the most technologically advanced nation on Earth, and obviously, as we're saying, that's part of a comic book context. But part of what we also saw in the movie, and I don't want to spoil it for any of you who haven't seen it, is there's a lot of Afrocentrism in Wakanda, where even though we have this high technology, we still have an African-centered cultural ethos. Even though
and gender equity.
And it was beautiful, right? So what I'd like to hear you discuss to some extent is how do we acquire an ethos, a conceptuality of an Afro future that is not
Eurocentric?
I want to say not Eurocentric. I don't want to say not poisoned by Eurocentrism either. I don't want to say that. But I'll let you give us the better words for it. Because yes, it's, again, because, okay, so part of this comes out of the idea, you can call somebody African American. And if you ask them what's American about them, usually it's going to be their name, their food, their address, the television they watch, their language. And if you ask them what's African about them, you hear crickets. Right? So if we're going to have an Afro future, how do we strip ourselves of the Eurocentrism, as you were saying before, and build that future on an Afrocentric ethos as opposed to a Eurocentric?
Some of that is even in the way we study history, because history books are written by different people, and depending on who wrote the book, you're going to get a different story. I mean, part of it is what lens we look through. I mean, if we look at a lens, I have, and this is totally unrelated, but maybe you'll get it. There are a lot of people I know who are really into astronomy. And, there's all these stars, and all these stars have names. And I say, okay, well, what's the name of our sun? And they say, the sun. And I say, well, but aren't there like billions of stars that may be suns on other planets? They're like, yeah. I'm like, so isn't it kind of conceited for us to like figure our sun is like the sun? It's almost like the, when you're a baby and you're born, you think the world revolves around you. And as you become more mature, you learn that it doesn't. Well, yeah, sometimes. So, I mean, really, some of it is looking at our lenses. Like for me, I am because we are, and therefore I am. And that's Ubuntu theory. And that's just the interconnectedness of everything and everybody, as opposed to I'm doing this because I want X. And thinking, a lot of it is going to involve us being willing to make sacrifices, individually and collectively. And we've been socialized that it's bad to be brilliant, it's bad to be smart and academic, it's bad to not have fly gear, it's bad to not have like, a nice whip. And there's all these things that we're taught are more important than, things like, making sure you eat right, make sure you get enough rest, making sure, that you handle your business, you take care of your family, you take care of home. And so some of it is a value shift. And a lot of it, those of us who espouse these values have to live by them, because it's easy to say and hard to do. None of us are perfect. And, in the same way that we want people to forgive us when we make a mistake, we've got to be forgiving of each other. I think I said earlier that we have like this aesthetic where like if it's black owned or black produced, it has to be perfect, or it's not worth our time. But if somebody else makes it, well, it's okay. And it's a process, it's a journey. And even like in the structure of this event, the next panel on increasing trust and respect in our community, there's a lot that we don't accomplish because we don't trust each other. So we can agree, we can come together and agree, and then after we walk like, where we can't see each other anymore, then all the mumbling starts.
I think it's interesting. I don't know that I really do that, but thank you.
Because earlier with the African Storytellers team shared several books with us, and they were, some of them written about Afrofuturism. And so I know that this is something that has been around for a very long time. I know that this movie just came out last Friday. So what's happening? What happened between the books that were shared with us and today's society, why are we just now talking about Afrofuturism? Why is it now big?
So it takes moments and it takes little pieces. How many people saw Get Out? So that film was an Afrofuturist film. It wasn't like long-term future, but it was a, speculative fiction, science fiction, and it was horror. I mean, even though they wanted to put it in the comedy category, how many people thought that movie was funny?
It had some humor in
Funny
it.
scary.
I mean, there was,
It had some humor in it.
yeah, but it was scarier to me than it was funny.
Very scary.
I mean, there are, most horror movies have funny moments because how do you have a film that's got one note and the whole film somebody's just like this?
Right.
But, if you've never lived or experienced that fear of, going into an environment where you're the other, maybe you don't know how scary that is. I mean, that was scary stuff. But anyway, it's building. It does things. It's weird. People will hear something today. How many of you have kids? How many of you had this experience where you told your child something and they didn't listen to you? And then like a month or a year or maybe 5 years later, they come back to you and tell you, you know what, Mama, so-and-so said, da-da-da-da-da-da. And you're thinking, you know what, I told you that. And you just like, that's right, baby. I'm glad somebody told you that. And you just let them roll with it. People have to hear things in marketing. They teach you like everything 6 or 7 times.
If I may, Dr. Feriali, for the young people who are here and the college age folks, there is an anthology called Dark Matters. It is an anthology of speculative writings, and you will find writings from W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yeah, I was going to quote that.
He was, okay, she's going to tell you about that. And then also there is a book of faith that it is their book of faith, my book of faith, that talks about old men or older ones who will dream dreams. And the younger ones, the daughters, the sons, will see visions. So Afrofuturism, again, it is the term of today. But as African-centered folks, we've had this thing locked down for a very, very long time.
So there were a couple things too. One, earlier T made reference to the symbols of Sankofa, and that's what's all over my skirt. Because the bird and the like little heart squiggly thing, both of those are symbols for Sankofa, which is basically it's never too late to go back and fix it. So that means that you can learn from the past to take action now, to go forward. It's just time. I mean, the reference to W.E.B. Du Bois, I was going to read this passage. How many of you heard of the book, The Souls of Black Folks? All right, so there's a passage in here, and I wasn't really aware of it until Professor Ford pointed it out to me with one of our conversations about this whole thing. I sit with Shakespeare, and he winces not. Across the color line, I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas, where smiling men and welcoming women glide in gilded halls. From out the caves of evening that swing between the strong-limbed earth and the tracery of the stars, I summon Aristotle and Aurelius, and what soul I will, and they come all graciously with no scorn nor condescension. So, wed with truth, I dwell above the veil. Is this the life you grudge us, O knightly America? Is this the life you long to change in the dull red hideousness of Georgia? Are you so afraid, lest peering from this high Pisgah between Philistine and Amalekite, we sight the promised land?
$1909.
So yeah, it's been around for a minute. And you can go back further. I mean, the Dogon people talked about amphibious beings coming to visit them, coming to visit their ancestors. So the limit is really our imagination and our will to, you know, act on our imagination. So again, the challenge for me is that we stretch the frame. I mean, I appreciate art and entertainment, and I probably watch way too many TV shows on Amazon and Netflix, but I also try to make sure that I'm always carving out some time to think strategically about the future and about what I can do personally or collectively with others in order to make the future better for the people who come after me than what we have now.
I'm glad you mentioned aliens, or for want of a better word, I'll use that. In the movie, if they could fly, at the end of it, they're all gone, but the night before, they're standing out looking at the sky, and she gets beaten for looking at the bird. Does that tie in with what you just said? And
I mean, it's all connected. I mean, if you look at things holistically, you can make connections between anything. There's a short story, I can't think of the name of it. I think it's in the Faces at the Bottom of the Well.
The bottom of the well?
But there's a short story where basically some aliens come and they say, you know, give us all your people with this much melanin in their skin. And in exchange for that, they say this to the world leaders, in exchange for that, we're going to solve all your technology, energy, we're going to make your world perfect, but we just want to take those people. And they have this whole thing about, you know, whether or not they will, and how are people going to react, and, you know, there are different interpretations. Some people interpret it as the aliens were malicious and wanted to round us all up to harm us. Then there's some people who feel like the aliens wanted to round us all up and punish the people who mistreat us. Sun Ra did a movie. And his movie, that's basically what it was. He wanted to take all black people to outer space to get us away from all of the oppression and hardship that we were experiencing.
That brings me to remembering a book. Anyone ever read the book Barnum's Freehold?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was amazing. It's about black people taking over to the ends of the world ends, and the ones who are taking over are African American black people.
So there's books written by Stephen Barnes. The first one is Lion's Blood, and I can't remember the second one, but it's a series. And it's an alternative history where instead of Europeans colonizing the United States, Africans colonized the United States. And the dominant religion, instead of it being Christianity, was Muslim. And the people who were imported and enslaved were Europeans. And it's not a book that is justifying anything. It's just giving people a different lens with which to view historical events and the allocation of resources and the impact of those allocations.
Is there another religion? You have Christianity, Muslim, and of course all the rest of them, but when you're talking about the state of our people and our originality, we weren't Christians in the beginning. We weren't Muslims in the beginning. And there's a lot of fear of the Muslim religion, and there's a lot of persecution of the Christian religion.
There are many religions, as you can imagine. If you go to the continent of Africa, it's not like there's like, people like to think of Africa as like a country where there's like one culture and everybody's doing the same stuff. There are a lot of different belief systems, and really it's about cosmology. It's about who are we, what do we believe is true, you know, what are our values. If you think, you know, there's the negative confessions of Mayat. There's like 42 of them that some people still say every day. Basically, I used to know it by heart. I'm slipping, but one of the ones that like kind of sticks with me is I have not exceeded my boundaries concern. I have not taken food from the young. You know, I haven't lied, I haven't stolen. You know, it's kind of, there's some people who say that the Ten Commandments are derivative of the negative confessions of Mayat. But you know, again, everything's connected. When people are developing value systems, you can have like people in a bunch of different places all have the same ideas. And I think one of the things that I think harms us in our community is we get stuck on, I'm right, and anybody who doesn't think like me is wrong. And so we start centering. And, you know, I personally don't think that does us a good service. Spurt?
You mentioned that you watch a lot of videos on Amazon and Netflix. Are there any Afrofuturism TV shows or movies that you can think of on Netflix?
I think that there's like doses. I think that I'm seeing more and more, it's probably more representation. I can't say that there's something that immediately comes to mind in terms of like a series that's wholly Afrofuturist. At one point there was a series, and you can probably find it on YouTube. I think it was called Cosmic Slop, and it was by, I think it was like George Clinton's Cosmic Slop. And it was kind of like the Twilight Zone, but, you know, from a black perspective. You know, probably the thing that I'm probably most geeked about right now is Discovery, because I think Michael Burnham is just bad. You know, I think she's smart, she's strong. You know, the only thing is I wish she was a captain. But, you know, I like the soundtrack of her. I had somebody ask me what that form of society was, and there's not a name for it. But it's interesting. You know, you don't have to buy anything, just replicate what you want, and everybody just does the kind of work they want to do, and as opposed to, you know, so there was a study done on the happiest places on Earth, and the place that scored the highest, just people that were, you know, randomly surveyed, was Denmark. And the things that were interesting were that people pretty much made the same salary regardless of what their job was. So instead of people doing stuff because, oh, I want to make more money if I do X, Y, Z, people genuinely are following their passions. And because, you know, there's a, you know, it's more of an egalitarian society, people aren't like stealing stuff from each other. You can park your bike and go to the store and come back and the bike is still there. All right.
Question?
Hello, doctor. My name is Benny. I was invited here by Ms. Claudel, and I'm so happy to be here, first of all. It's just an honor for me to just dress up and walk these aisles and be part of you fine people. It's nice to hear everything you guys are saying, and yes, I think I need to start reading too. So my question, based on my background, so I was born here in the U.S. by two parents coming from Africa, and Guinea, West Africa, but I was raised in Africa. I was only here for 9 months. My mom passed away, we went to Africa. Raised in Africa, came back here when I was 19 years old, and it's such a touchy issue about blacks. I find some people raise questions, why now? Why it's taking too long? And it's been my question since I've been to US. Because the one thing I was told in Africa, coming here, is to stay away from